Hello and bonjour, I'm Sarah Bukhari and you're watching Power Dilemmas here at TAC TV. Folks, election 2018 is in full swing. The writ has not been dropped, but we can see 4 parties in Ontario campaigning in full swing. We recently got something new from Progressive Conservative leader Doug Ford, and he says that he supports Ontario's protected Greenbelt, but is considering opening it up to build affordable housing on, adding that he will replace any protected lands that are developed upon. Doug Ford is reversing a plan to open a large protected green space around the Toronto region to housing development if elected premier this spring. The Progressive Conservative leader says he has heard from people asking him not to touch the Greenbelt since outlining his developmental pledge. He now says a Tory government would maintain the Greenbelt in its entirety. The Greenbelt, a 7,200 square kilometre area that borders the Greater Golden Horseshoe region around Lake Ontario, was protected from urban development by legislation in 2005. So to talk about Greenbelt and more, we have our regular commentator, Mr. Ari Laskin. Ari is with the Capitol Hill Group, and we are going to talk about the Greenbelt issue here in Ontario. Welcome to my show, Ari.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
So, Ari, our viewers would like to know, what is this Greenbelt area in Ontario?
So the Greenbelt was created in 2005 by Dalton McGuinty. Excuse me. He established the area because to try to slow down urban sprawl, and this was a good idea to try to find alternative ways so that we don't compromise our watersheds, we don't compromise the green space, which is not as common as it used to be in the city of Toronto. And at the time, in 2005, this seemed like an okay idea. I don't know if there was people that thought this was an amazing idea. There were some, that's for sure, but I know that there was also a lot of opponents to this as well. Currently, the Greenbelt is right now sitting just a couple kilometers north of the Toronto city limits and just a couple kilometers north of some major urban centers. You're looking at an area that is predominantly green space, but also has a lot of brown space, or brownfield rather, and other areas that could be reclaimed for commercial development or housing development. Mr. Ford listened to the response received from the Ontario public about his initial call that he would open up the Greenbelt for development, and has since reversed that plan and said that he will not be touching the Greenbelt. And from my perspective, I think this is the actions of a responsible leader. Made a statement. It was not received by the public properly, or well, rather, and he took that public response and he adjusted his stance. Ultimately, Mr. Ford is there to represent the people, and I think he knows that it's the people of Ontario that are ultimately his boss.
So the people of Ontario were the reason he reversed his earlier statement?
I believe so, yes.
And what goals was he thinking in his mind, or what goals he was focusing connected to the people of Ontario when he reversed his statement about the Greenbelt?
I think that initially when he said that he would open the Greenbelt up for development, he was responding to a number of comments that he had received, and the party has been receiving, well, at least when I was working there in 2007, we were receiving a lot of complaints from municipalities saying that the Greenbelt basically handcuffed their ability to grow their cities, to create new housing opportunities, to create new commercial opportunities. Caledon has been struggling with the Greenbelt for quite some time in terms of establishing proper area for commercial development and housing development. These are problems that the municipality was basically handed by the government of Ontario. There was some consultation, I believe, but the consultation, I don't believe, was sufficient enough for the municipalities to really get their issues fleshed out.
What are the stakes of developers in Greenbelt?
Well, I think that's a question you have to ask I don't honestly know what the stakes are for them. I know that there is, as you said, 7,300 square kilometers of space. And in that space, there's a lot of it that is going to be natural preserved and naturally protected areas. Because at the end of the day, we do need to do our part to protect our wetlands. We do need to do our part to protect our farmlands. Ontario is home to some of the most pristine, fertile ground to grow food. And the Greenbelt does have a lot of that space in there. But I think that we need to look at this proportionately as well. When you have a farmer that wants to expand their farm to produce more goods for people, and you have a government that says, sorry, you can't do that because we've established this Greenbelt area without any real consultation, I think that you're going to end up with a lot of farms saying, you know what, I'm just going to close up shop and I'll go somewhere else where the conditions are more acceptable to me. So, in my opinion, I think that it's almost accomplishing the opposite of what it was there to set up, which was to protect our green space. It is protecting some of the green space, but it's also causing a lot of this green space or a lot of this agricultural space to seek, pardon the pun, greener pastures. Okay,
so so now the stance of the PC party is that they're not going to touch the Greenbelt. Connected to that, what is the reference of Swiss cheese by Kathleen Wynne? She's talked about that, you know, it's very funny that she's, you know, she's comparing the piece of land with the Swiss cheese. I couldn't really understand, and I thought I'll ask you.
Well, if you look at the way that the land has been divided up, it's sort of an ad hoc. We're going to stick a flag over there and say that that's going to be one border, and then we're going to put another one over here, and we're going to say that's going to be another border. There was no real, I would say, scientific consultation. I'd be happy to be wrong on that, and I'd be happy for somebody to say to me that, yes, actually, we did do some significant scientific consultation, and this is the area that is determined to be the best suited for a Greenbelt. But from all indications that I've seen and all anecdotal evidence that I've seen, there was very little consultation done on this fact. So when she's referring to the Greenbelt as being Swiss cheese, I would say she's looking at it as being pockets of good space versus pockets of bad space. It's a very odd analogy, I would say, and that's the only thing that I can think of with that. Maybe speak with the Premier and see what she actually was trying to say.
Okay, so let's get back to the campaign mode of the two main parties, Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives. Let's throw an NDP into it as well. What is the mood around the campaigns at this time, at this moment in time?
Well, I think with the Tories, there's a very jubil motion. Everybody is very happy and excited about the prospect of being able to form a government. It's been 15 years that we've been looking at the Liberals as the governing party for the province of Ontario, and I think the Tories are looking at this as being, this is finally their time to shine. The NDP are very similar in that respect. This has really become an election about change. And the NDP represent one aspect of change, and the Progressive Conservative Party represents another aspect of change. So I would say that we're looking at three real parties here that are probably going to enter into this election campaign with a margin that isn't as big as we've been seeing so far. We have 40 some odd days until Ontario heads to the polls, and we find out on June the 8th or June the 7th rather at 9 o'clock who our next government is going to be. But I think that you're looking at it's anybody's game at this point.
Okay, so when do you think the writ is going to be dropped? What is the date there?
So there's rumors going around that it's going to be dropped either on the 9th of May, which is next Wednesday, but there's another rumor that just got popped up a little while ago that maybe the Premier is going to dissolve Parliament on Friday.
Oh, okay.
And we could be entering into campaign mode as of Saturday morning.
And it was so I was so happy to hear that it was Doug Ford's interview somewhere that he keeps his iPhone or telephone on and he receives messages from his fans.
Yeah.
Just elaborate on that piece. I really like the idea because he's really coming across as a leader of the people.
Well, and this is something that I would say should transcend party lines. Politicians, elected officials are there to represent the people that elect them. They need to, in my honest opinion, they need to understand that their boss is not the party leader, is not the Speaker of the House or the Premier or whomever. Their boss is their constituents. They are there to serve the people. They are public servants. So when Mr. Ford said that he keeps his cell phone, he gives his cell phone number out and he'll get calls or text messages at 1 a.m. and people are very surprised that he'll respond back, you know, that to me speaks volumes. That to me tells me that this is an individual who recognizes the importance of his role and recognizes that this is not something that's handed to people. This is something that you have to earn people's trust, and you have to make sure that they know that if they're in trouble or they need something, you're there for them. And I can honestly say that I've seen this firsthand. When I ran Christine Elliott's leadership campaign back in 2015, Doug was a very strong supporter of hers and worked very closely with us. I saw then that he would get a random text message or phone call from Jim, who lives out in, I don't know, Etobicoke or lives out in Scarborough, and he didn't know this guy, but this guy got his number somehow. Doug would stop what he's doing and would sit down somewhere and speak with the guy for as long as he needed to in order for this person to feel secure and reassured that somebody's going to help them. I take my hat off to any politician that's going to be doing that and takes that job seriously.
I think that is a great attitude which should be present in all leaders, and I think it's some attribute he is taken from his brother Rob Ford, the mayor of Toronto.
And I would say a lot of the stuff he's taken from his late father. And his late father, all the story, I never had the honor or pleasure of knowing him, but all of the stories that I've heard is he was truly an impressive representative for his constituents.
Okay, Ari, it was very good to talk to you today, and I believe you're going to talk next Wednesday when the writ will be dropping.
Should be an exciting day.
Thank you so much. And with this, I believe, viewers, that it is an amazing quality in a leader to call the constituents back. And these are the qualities which we need in our leaders, that they have a phone, you call them, and then they get back to you either by phone or by text messages. So election is just around the corner. Your vote is a very special right which you have. So choose your leaders and vote for change. With this, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the issue of asylum seekers in Canada. Stay tuned. Welcome back. There is a noted rise in asylum seekers which has sparked calls for changes to US-Canada border agreement. Canada wants to change our bilateral agreement to allow it to turn back thousands of asylum seekers walking across the border, but the United States is not cooperating, according to a Canadian official with knowledge of the discussions. Under the Safe Third Country Agreement, or STCA, asylum seekers who arrive at a formal Canada-US border crossing going in either direction are turned back and told to apply for asylum in the first country they arrived in. Canada wants the agreement rewritten to apply to the entire border. More than 26,000 people have illegally crossed the Canada-US border to file refugee claims in the past 15 months, walking over ditches and on empty roads along the world's longest undefended border. Many have told Reuters they might have stayed in the United States were it not for President Donald Trump's immigration rhetoric and policies. Canadian officials first discussed changing the pact with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security officials last September, shortly after more than 5,700 asylum seekers walked into Canada in August. For now, another official said Canada would keep doing what it is doing, managing the influx of refugee claimants in a strained system while seeking to dissuade would-be crossers through outreach efforts. The opposition asks the Liberal government what they are doing to help social programs that are strained from large number of asylum seekers. Canada has also urged U.S. officials to crack down on visas, saying many of the asylum seekers had valid U.S. visas and used the United States merely as a transit point. So to talk about the influx of asylum seekers on Canada's land, we have Chantal Delage. Chantal is an immigration lawyer in Toronto. Welcome to my show, Chantal.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Chantal, why are Mexicans fleeing their country and are seeking asylum in Canada, and why not into the U.S.?
Well, Canada's refugee system is in some ways a little bit more flexible than that in the U.S. If we look at a country like Mexico, for example, Mexico is sometimes a refugee-producing country because they do have a lot of problems there with drug cartels. They have political persecution, sometimes gender-based persecution, and persecution of sexual minorities as well. So there are legitimate refugees from Mexico, although not all of them are, but there are some. The problem, of course, in the U.S. is that, number one, although they use the same international law definition that Canada does, they're known to apply it a little bit more strictly. So there are situations, for example, where the exact same claim may be accepted in Canada, but not necessarily in the U.S. In addition, Canada has very generous programs that allow people to work while they're waiting for their claim to be heard, allow them to have health care while they're waiting, and if they're indigent, they have the right to access social programming as well to help them out until they can find a job.
So what kind of jobs they are taking up in Canada?
Well, many of them, of course, end up with entry-level jobs, so jobs that, you know, in the service sector, hospitality sector, that sort of thing. But the important thing to remember as well is that particularly the people who are coming through the U.S., many of them have been in the U.S. for a long time. And some of them have been U.S. educated, some of them have U.S. job experience. So people like that are actually able to go into good paying positions in Canada. So not only minimum wage jobs, but some of them are highly talented.
Okay, that's good news to hear. But there are hordes and hordes of asylum seekers in Canada. Don't you think it's a burden on our economy?
Well, overall, the studies show that people, when they come into Canada, are an overall benefit to the economy. So rather than taking jobs, they create jobs. They spend money, you know, they send their kids to school, they buy houses, that sort of thing. But what is creating a strain right now is because so many people have come all within a short period of time, the system wasn't ready to process them quickly enough. So it's resulted in very large backlogs at the Refugee Board, which determines their claims, which means people are waiting longer to get a yes or a no answer. And also, you know, for those people who are arriving who don't have resources of their own, you know, sometimes they have to go into shelters and things like that, which is causing an infrastructure strain. But over the long term, the studies do show that people contribute positively, not negatively.
Okay, so you are saying that the only problem in Canada caused by the asylum seekers is that there is a huge backlog.
Yes, there's a huge backlog, and of course there are infrastructure strains as well. I mean, when anybody is new in the country, no matter how talented they are, it does take them some time to get on their feet. And, you know, until people can get a work permit and find a job, they may need to have access to welfare, for example. They may need access to shelter housing, and that, of course, comes at a public cost. But that's only in the short term. I'm talking about over the longer term. I think there is a net benefit, but, I mean, with everybody coming in such a short period of time and straining those resources that we have right now, it feels very urgent.
Okay, so, and you know, Canada has welcomed Syrian refugees, and now, you know, in the past year, a few months, 15 months, I believe it says that a huge influx of asylum seekers from Mexico using U.S. as a transit. So where are we headed? Are we going to welcome more Syrian refugees at this time?
Well, there are two different ways that refugees come to Canada. One is that they show up here somehow on their own means, like, for example, the people that are crossing the border. Those people get their hearing inside of Canada. The way that most of the Syrians came to Canada was through government-assisted refugee programs or private sponsorships. So, interestingly, the government this year has put a very small quota on the number of refugees that will be brought from outside the country, whether by private sponsorship or government sponsorship. However, the number of people that are showing up on their own and making claims, that of course is something that we have no control over, because we have no way of knowing on any given day how many people are going to show up. Those people, once they're adjudicated, I mean, if they are approved, then yes, potentially there could be a lot more, you know, accepted refugees in Canada. But I think that our number of refugees that we're bringing from overseas, from refugee camps, for example, that number is actually going down. And that's something I think that the government really needs to work on. There are so many Canadians out there who are very generous, and they want to sponsor refugees. They want to pay their own money and pay for them once they get here, have no strain on the public purse whatsoever, and they're ready to stand behind it with their checkbook. And yet those people are being told, no, I'm sorry, we have a quota and you're not able to sponsor those people. I think we should take the leash off those people and let them bring as many as they want if they're willing to back it financially.
Okay. Good. Thank you so much, Chantal, for a very informative discussion on the asylum seekers in Canada.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon on the same topic later. Thank you so much. So, Canada has been a welcoming platform to welcome refugees, either they're from Syria or some war-torn countries, or countries which are very discriminatory against people of various sexual orientations. We should be very proud that we live in a country which welcomes the refugees coming from such places. In other news, a longtime Conservative MP Gord Brown has died after suffering a heart attack in his Parliament Hill office this morning. The 57-year-old MP, who represented the Eastern Ontario riding of Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes, was first elected in 2004. His wife, Claudine, also works on the Hill in a senator's office. She and Brown had two sons together, Chance and Tristan, according to the Conservative Party website. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer tweeted his condolences, calling for prayers for Brown's family as they cope with a terrible loss. And with this, I would like to sign off. Again, it is the election season, folks. Your vote is your right, so use your right very cautiously and research the backgrounds of all the candidates and all the parties. And the wave is vote for change. Take care. Ciao.